way for your help just now. Much appreciated.
No problem. Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Before we do anything, before we go to the agenda, I just would like to say a few words about Councillor Bob Stevens, who we've sadly lost, very sadly lost since the last meeting. I don't believe he's known by all members of the board, but certainly by some of the board members and by the officers. I got to know Bob very well as chair of the committee. He'd been an officer in the Merchant Navy, and he was in every way an officer and gentleman. He was totally committed to the well-being of the fund and to public service, and he will be greatly missed. So I'm just going to ask you all if we could just pause for just a few moments for those of us who knew Bob, just to think of him and remember him, just for a few moments. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, let's move back to the business. And first of all, apologies. We say, Dave, do we have any others?
Chair, the only apologies I've had are from Councillor Parsons.
Okay, thank you. And then disclosures of interest, mine are the same as usual, the LAPFF and the American law firm. And Alan normally has some. I presume they're still the same, Alan?
That's right, yes.
Does anybody else have any interest to declare? If not, I think we can move on to item 2, I think, forward plan. And that's going to be Chris, I think, isn't it?
I think that's me, Keith.
Oh, sorry, you did send me the list this morning. Yeah, I beg your pardon. Okay, Victor, over to you.
Well, it was drafted by Chris wrote the report, so I think we can call that a tag team.
Okay.
The forward plan is as stated. The dates for 2021-2022 are in the process of being confirmed. We are intending to keep those 5 to 6 weeks after the investment subcommittees, so that we can incorporate actions from that into your board notes. And also that allows officers to have a bit of time to create appropriate papers for your meeting rather than having to dash from one to the other. The dates are coming through in the next fortnight. They have been circulated internally. A note that there is a typo where we've put proposed April 2020, currently 4th March. At the last meeting, the minutes state that we are intending to hold that on the 13th of April. That remains unchanged, but as stated, once we have the finalised dates for 2021-22, we will circulate those as save the dates so that committee and board members have those dates. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, we will have some consultation on those dates, hopefully before they're set, Victoria.
I can make sure that happens, yes.
I mean, obviously they have to fit in with the council's diary and, as you say, schedule with the committee, but I mean, I don't have very many commitments these days, but obviously, and many of those that I have can be moved, but I have some that, for example, with the LAPFF that can't be moved, and they've been set for the whole year ahead.
Noted.
Okay, and does anybody else have any questions or comments? Anything else on the forward plan, Victoria?
The rest of the forward plan is to state what we're hoping to do over the next year, and that's fairly unchanged from the previous forward plans. The Q2 October 2021 is inserted, but these are standard items, standing items, so there's nothing particularly to note.
Okay. Any questions from anybody? Questions or comments? Okay, if not, we'll move to agenda item 3. I think that's going to be Vicky, isn't it? The pensions admin activity.
You have a hand.
Okay.
Andy?
Keith, sorry, just before we move on,
Yeah.
Are we able just to introduce the new board member?
Oh, yes, apologies, apologies. Because I've seen, dreadful, what an oversight, what an oversight. Thank you, Andy. Because I've spoken to Sean a couple of times and he's been on training sessions. Yes, members, you may not be aware, but we do have a new board member. Sean has joined us. Sean, would you just like to introduce yourself and say a few words? I think that might be best. We're very, in my view, we're very fortunate to have recruited Sean, and I'm sure he'd be of great value to the board. But over to you, Sean.
Thank you, those kind words. Yes, I'm the employee member, along with Alan, I think. And I've been member of the scheme since 2008. So, and just of late, I've become more interested in pensions. There was a certain amount of self-interest in that, as I'm not as young as I used to be. And I'm very pleased to join. At the moment, I'm the coroner for Coventry and Warwickshire. And before that, I was a barrister in private practice for 16 years.
Okay, well, thank you, Sean, and apologies again. Yes, so
Okay.
That was an unforgivable oversight, so I can only apologise. But Sean and I have spoken a couple of times, and he's participated. He did, in fact, I think, Sean, you came to one training session before your formal appointment, I think, because we had to wait for it to be formally approved by council. But we were strongly, obviously, having spoken to you, we were in no doubt that that would be confirmed, and we do feel very, very happy to have you on board. So welcome aboard, and I look forward to your contribution, which I'm sure will be of great value. So thank you very much. Thank you, Andy.
On that note, have we confirmed Sean's appointment, just to confirm it across the board?
Yes, that's been duly approved through the council's processes, so he's here by right.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Sean. Okay, it is over to Vicky now.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to take you through the pensions administration activity and performance update. So moving through the report, if we go to point 3, we've made significant progress in the governance action plan, clearing off 50 of the 54 actions. The 4 that are remaining are all work in progress, so they will be completed by the next pensions board. We're hoping that this governance action plan now becomes part of our business as usual, and the team are making steps to ensure that anything that was raised there is now part of the processes that we do on a daily basis. So item 4, annual benefit statements. So again, annual benefit statements went out, should have been out by the 31st of August. We reported to staff and pensions that unfortunately there was a number of statements that hadn't gone out on time. This was due to an issue with our print unit rather than our external print unit rather than the pensions administration team. The problem was identified quite quickly after the 31st of August, and all statements did go out by the 10th of September. Due to the fact that a number didn't go out by the 31st of August, we did report ourselves to the TPR, who have already confirmed that there's no further action required because remedy had already taken place, and our procedures have meant that for next year we ensure that these checks are put in with the print unit to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So a good success story for the team, really improved on last year's project of sending out annual benefit statements, and moving forward again we're doing a lessons learned from this year and ensuring that everything is put into place for next year to make sure we carry on with that good practice. So year-end, the annual returns for employees has been completed. Any queries that were generated were cleared. So that was all good work that was done earlier this year. The GMP reconciliation on point 6, we're still working through that information. So HMRC have confirmed the data that they hold, and we need to make sure that that is matching on our record. So that work is underway at the moment. Key performance indicators. So on one of the appendix, you'll see our key performance indicators. So if we just move down to appendix 2, we can see the actual cumulative totals for percentages. So where the percentages aren't meeting the 95% target, we would hope that that is for tasks that we perform where there is no payment being made. Our priority is for any payments being made to members. Those are the ones that should be dealt with first. And if there's any questions on those numbers, as you can see, there's been a vast improvement in a lot of those numbers. July, we did see a drop off in some of the totals, but that would be when we were working on year-end queries, work for annual benefit statements, and obviously it's a summer holiday period, so we have staff on annual leave at that point as well. So, but you'll see in August they picked up significantly. So that wasn't a trend. July is not a trend on some of those percentages. So moving back up, so workloads also on appendix 3, you'll see that the trajectory of work is moving downwards, so that we are keeping up with what's coming in, and we are actually managing to do more at some point, so eating into any backlog that we have. So that's a really positive change for the team. The slide shows, sorry, the graph shows that obviously where there was an upturn in work, this is where we would be dealing with year-end queries. So the business as usual takes a bit of a backseat so that we can clear all the year-end queries. But the team and I back on the business as usual work, and that is showing a significant downward trend in completing the work that's coming in. So next we will move to breaches. So on the breaches log, we've got 104 amber breaches, and this again is mostly to do with employers not sending in their returns quick enough. So we're chasing those and making sure that comes down. We should also have reported there also one red breach for the annual benefit statements not being sent out, all of them by the 31st of August. However, we've already actioned that and corrected it, so that's not been logged on this actual chart. Point 10 for the audit reports. So initially in November 19, there was an internal audit report where the team came out with a limited assurance level. That has been improved. We've been working on the audit action report, action plan report, and have managed to increase the level to a moderate assurance, and obviously work will be ongoing to ensure that all processes and procedures are there, and the audit can see that they're documented, and the team are following all the procedures that are required for us. Point 11, iConnect. So iConnect is progressing really well. We did have a short delay with getting the VPN connection established. However, we managed to catch up the timescale on that. We lost a couple of weeks, but we've picked that back up. And Alistair Wickens, his team, the employee relations team, are working hard on getting all the information from our employers now for phase 1 to get them onboarded, ready to do a live data transfer for the November payroll. Following on from that, we've now managed to get Warwickshire County Council payrolls, of which they administer 30, so 30 payrolls that Warwickshire deal with for us. They're going to start looking at doing some data transfers for phase 2. So we've moved them forward. They were going to be later on in the project, but they've made really good progress on creating their data extract. So we've moved them forward, and they're going to be doing work to look at transferring their payroll data across to us in the period November to January. So that's really good, a good news story for this project, because we've been working really hard with the payroll team to get that work sorted out. We've also identified the employers that we're going to have in phase 3 and 4, and we've started to communicate with them the timescales and just keep them in touch with what's going on and what we'll need them to do when, so that we can keep the project moving forward, ready for the next phases. So point 12, McLeod Sergeant remedy. So obviously the McLeod age discrimination case is progressing. The consultation documents went in, so the close date was the beginning of October. So WCC and the Pension Fund have submitted some responses to those consultations. So we'll wait to see what comes back from that. But further work needs to be done. We need to keep moving forward with this project now to ensure that we're contacting our employers about the data that we're going to need to update records, and then how we're going to collect that data and then upload it into the systems. Some work is ongoing at the minute with myself, Liz, Patricia Kinsella from HR, and Chris Norton also on the business case to work out the costs for running this project and making sure that we can achieve what's required for what's going to be implemented for this remedy. So there's quite a lot of work ongoing for that, and it will be a prominent feature on the agenda for the next few meetings, I would say. So point 13, changes to the exit payment regulations. So obviously this has been an item that's been discussed for a long time. It started back in 2016, and the government have now actually decided to push it through. So this means that anybody who is exiting employment early, where they can access pension benefits, so if they're over the age of 55, if there is a redundancy payment, so a termination payment, and there's also a cost to the pension fund for early payment of benefits, so a pension strain cost. There is now a cap placed on that so that it can't exceed £95,000, and if it does, that then means there's an effect on the members' benefits. So currently, as it stands, members can be terminated on employment. Their employment can be terminated, they can be over the age of 55, access their pension benefits straight away unreduced, and get a redundancy payment. Those rules are now changing, so from the 4th of November they will be in place, and it will mean that members won't be able to access an unreduced pension anymore. There will be effects on their pension, and also if their total exit payments exceed £95,000, then some of their termination payments won't be payable either, and further reductions can be applied to claw back some of that money for the exit payments exceeding £95,000. So this is where the government are trying to cap those high exit payments being made to what was initially thought to be high earners, but it is actually going to affect a bigger majority of membership, because it will affect anybody who has a pension strain cost and a redundancy payment, even if it doesn't exceed £95,000. So the problem that we have with the Pensions Administration is that the exit cap regulations have changed from the 4th of November, or will change from the 4th of November. However, the local government pension scheme regulations, which will allow us to calculate the reductions to benefits now, have not been amended and are unlikely to be amended by the 4th of November. So the two sets of regulations are in conflict. So we're waiting for further information from the Local Government Association to say what can we do in this transitional period where our two sets of regulations don't match. So we are waiting on further guidance for that. So at the minute, what that means for us is that we're limited on giving information out to our employers. So if they are looking to make anybody redundant past the 4th of November, we can't at the minute provide them with the strain cost figures for those members, because we haven't got the tools to allow us to do that. Our regulations don't allow us to calculate the reduction or the pension strain costs for those people. So we're communicating that with our employers and just trying to keep them in the loop as to what we are able to do for them. So moving on to item 14, employers leaving and joining the fund. So we have a number of academy schools looking to join the scheme. So we've got Ardenfield, Lillington School, all converting to academy status, Trinity Catholic School. So most of the employers that we look to bring into the scheme now are academies, so schools converting to academy status. So that is the report from me. If anybody's got any questions, please let me know.
I've got a couple of things I'd like to say.
Okay.
The copy of the breaches log that we have access to on the pension fund website.
Yes.
Seems to me to be in some kind of disarray. The records don't seem to be complete. It seems to be out of date. Maybe I don't understand it fully, but to me it doesn't seem very satisfactory. Okay,
that's fine. That's something we'll look at and try and do some work to improve that then, if it's not looking if it's not easy enough to follow or it's not quite.
For example, the colours, there's a colour coding system in there.
Yeah.
So you can tell at a glance, but it's not filled in. All the cells are white.
Okay.
The date of entry of the records isn't complete for many of them. And I don't quite understand how the difference between last financial year and the sheet for the present financial year. There's records that have been made in last year's that have obviously been put in this year.
Right.
I'm not quite sure how that works in practice and how you can see what date that record relates to. For me, there's a lack of clarity about it, and it seems as though it's out of date.
Okay, that's fine. I'll look at that, Alan, and we'll look to obviously make some amendments and adjustments to that to make it more sort of up to date, and obviously using the colours would make sense. I don't know why that's not on there, so we'll make sure that's done.
Thank you.
Okay, can I say sorry? I was muted. What I was trying to get through to say was we'd go through this very quickly, hopefully, but page by page. So if we can go back to page 9, where we have obviously the action plan and benefit statements. So if anyone wants to raise any points, and then
yes, I would, please. The annual benefit statements. 3,000 deferred members. Now, I'm well aware of the pain and heartache that goes on deferred payments. They're terrible things to sort, but 3,000 seemed a rather large number to me, and I was just interested, has that been sort of the same for many years, and by getting the external company to sort it, is that a way of trying to sort it, or was there something in the last year that suddenly made it become a massive issue?
No, I think from last year's annual benefit statements, where we had to report to TPR that we hadn't delivered on time with the statements, further work was done to identify why certain statements hadn't gone out, and when a record has no address on it, it's marked as gone away, and a statement wouldn't be produced for that person. So from last year, where we've done more work to identify records with data that's missing and things like that, this is where we've been able to see that we've got this total number of deferred benefits that don't have up-to-date addresses. So once the tracing service have found these people, we will update their addresses and obviously ask them at that point to keep us in touch with when they're moving house. So just to keep reinforcing those messages. So each year they should be getting a statement from us. Yes. And at that point, it's a reminder to say, well, you know, if you're moving house or you're changing any details, let us know. So yeah, it should be a sort of a clean-up exercise, and then going forward, it shouldn't ever get to that position again.
I agree with everything you said, but doesn't that suggest that it should be a red now?
For breaches?
Yes.
Yes, actually, probably yes. It should be logged as a breach because we're not sending out benefit statements.
Quite.
But that was picked. Yeah, so that was picked up last year. So yes, it should be sitting on there as a red.
Right. I mean, I'll end as I started. So I really do appreciate the difficulty of dealing with the deferred pensioners. Anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Okay, those points are noted. Shall we? So we'll move on to page 10. If anybody wants to just shout, I think is probably the quickest way. I know we have these raised hands things, but I'm looking at the paper, so I think unless somebody informs me, page 11, you touched on breaches.
Just a quick one on that, on page 11, 9.4 is to do the iConnect. I think overall in 9, I'm fairly happy with the progress with the breaches, but it would be good just to know that the implementation of iConnect, what's the percentages in phase 1 and phase 3 and 4, just to sort of get an idea how it might get implemented.
Okay, yeah, we can have a look at that for you. So once we go live with the phase 1, we can start looking at how the data's coming through to us quicker and reducing those numbers on the breaches.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Vicky. Then we've got McClure. Well, of course, those of us who were on the training session yesterday had a full briefing from Vicky on this. So we're all relative experts now on that. But if anybody has any questions today,
well,
so that's.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Arguably, it should be on 13, but it doesn't matter because it's the same issue. As Keith said, I don't want to go over what we did yesterday, but going on to the resource bit, which you mentioned yesterday, can I just ask if it's your intention to have one person who's responsible for this whole issue? I mean, you'd have to have more than one person working on it, but is there one person that's responsible for it?
So what we're looking at the minute is a project manager, and we're looking at external companies that could provide this service to us. So we would have an external project manager potentially, and then we'll have key stakeholders. So we're going to have a strategic board that will be in charge of all the different work streams and making sure that the project is running smoothly. So it won't be one person. We've got a number of
that's right.
Yeah,
because that's all I wanted to be assured of, that there was a point person who was responsible for that issue. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Vicky.
Ultimately, responsible for making sure it happens as a senior person responsible for the service. So I'll make sure the resources are in place to deliver it.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So that was page 13. And I think that being so, if there are no other questions or comments,
I'd like to comment on page 13.
Okay, over to you, Alan.
From 13.2, it sounds like the government have actually done something a bit more aggressive than they previously planned. And from my point of view, I actually found that rather shocking, because it's another instance where the government are moving the goalposts. The game started and they're shifting the goalposts around. This means that people who've dedicated themselves to working in the public sector on quite low salaries and have been in service a long time are likely to come in the scope for being affected by this. And it comes to retirement and they're facing redundancy, and they're basically being kicked in the shins. They're being kicked when they're down. It's a dreadful thing, I think. It's really shocking. And I do hope that the response to the consultation will be strong, because it's dreadful. I've been taking industrial action before when the government have decided to play these games, And I think it's a really shocking and disgraceful thing. I've said my piece now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Alan. I'm not sure. I'll have to take advice on whether or not the board can make any representations on this. Certainly, this is something which obviously trade unions take up, and also I know the Scheme Advisory Board look at this very closely as well. But I don't know whether or not the board is sort of allowed, authorised to make representations, or indeed whether you want to do so. I mean, frankly, given the representations that are made by others, you know, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I will. It's not what we say isn't going to make much difference, but I think Alan's, you know, quite right to voice his concerns as many others have done. I'm in your hands.
I'm a great one for writing to my MP on these kind of issues. I think he's familiar with my name.
Okay.
Can I just come in briefly, please? Sandy Felt. So it's there is a strong representation from across local government around this generally. Slightly got our hands tied now that the legislation's been passed and signed off. And obviously leaves us in a really difficult position with the conflicts in the two pieces of legislation as well, particularly when we've got live cases going through already at the moment. So there is a lot of strong representation going in, but there has been for the last 4 years, and government have effectively ignored it. So I'm not quite sure what that might achieve yet. It may be that this ends up in legal litigation effectively from a sector as a whole, or particular parts of the sector, to test out whether what is there is actually viable from a legal point of view. So I think it's a bit of a watch this space, but we are doing everything we can to try and do what we can to get to a sensible position. I think generally the concept of an exit cap on the redundancy side of it, I think wasn't particularly argued by a lot of people, but I think including the actuarial strains, the bit that particularly creates a problem, and the inequity caused by local government compared to other sectors where this isn't the case, comparable sectors like health and fire and central civil servants, as it were. So yeah, there's more to go on this year, I think, but at the moment we've got to live with the situation we find ourselves in, unfortunately.
Right, thank you, Andy, that's helpful. Okay, so if the board are willing, we'll move on, note everything that's been said there, and we'll move on to the next item 4, which I think is going to be Chris, the review of pension admin costs.
Okay, thanks very much, Keith. I'll just go through a brief run through this. So first of all, to say thanks so much to Liz Firmstone and Jill Griffiths, who did the work behind this report. Jill Griffiths is an accountant within finance who works in the projects team, outside of the pensions teams, but within inside the finance service. So the review is complete. We discussed our kind of issues in a bit of detail with another local authority kind of pensions team, and that was very helpful. The costs in 2019-20, you can see the revised costs in the kind of pictures in section 3.2. So they're lower than they were in 2018-19. And then if you run forward to this year, where we do this year's benchmarking for 2020-21, they'll be lower still. So where we've got £21.85 in 19-20, that will be down to £20.21. And where we've got the payroll costs per pensioner of 11.20, that will be down to under £5. SIFR's doing some work to refine its guidance, so other people's costs may move around, but we're expecting our costs to line up closer with the average in 2021, all other things being equal. Payroll costs have been reviewed and constructed from the ground up. So as you know from before, the costs came down to 176 grand. In these workings, we've split out that part of payroll, which is IT, and shown that in the right box in the analysis. And if you fast forward to 2021, what's 176 grand this year would become about 101 grand at that point. We've taken out actuarial costs to make these costings like for like with everyone else. So the pure admin and overheads have been recalculated and slightly different, slightly higher because of an element of catch-up, having not reviewed them for a period of time. What we're doing now with these benchmarking returns is when these are submitted to SIPFA, rather than being done as a technical exercise and going straight over to SIPFA, they're being cited by senior managers so that we have a look at them at a high level, see how they look and feel, and make sure that we're content that they're reflecting things accurately. That's all I had to say by way of introduction. I had to take any questions or comments.
Can I start? I'd just like to say, Chris, that it's clear that you've put a lot of work into this, and I'm impressed. I think it's a good piece of work. It's clearly presented, and it shows the kind of outcome I think we were hoping for. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes, I would echo that. I was muted, and I don't know if Deborah is muting me, which is fair enough, but I didn't knowingly mute myself. But I would echo what Alan has just said. And the phrase I was using, the direction of travel is what we wanted to see, and is clearly right. I mean, the payroll costs are still a bit higher, but from what Chris has said, they're getting much closer for the next year. So excellent, well done all. Does anybody else have any comments or questions on agenda item 4, please? I won't go through it page by page, it's not that long, but I'll give you a moment in case anybody has any questions or comments, apart from the one that Alan has just made, which, as I say, I support.
No, Chair, you read my mind and you said what I was going to say, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paminda. Thank you very much for that. Mind reading is something my wife says I should do more often. Anyway, let's move on. The next one, item 5, is risk monitoring, and I think that's going to be Victoria.
Thank you, Keith. The risk monitoring is still split out into a general risk monitor and a COVID-19 specific risk monitor. In the paper, we have documented how initially the general risk monitor has moved from the February 2020 assessment, and how we've seen progress over the last 6-7 months. You'll note that there are some risks that have still increased in a net score. I think the ones that are particularly worthy of comment are the asset values, both long-term and short-term. These do have slightly different drivers. So the long-term asset values, COVID is one of the items impacting, but actually the trade disputes with the US and China, as well as Brexit for the UK holdings, and also at this particular point in time, there's quite a lot of volatility to do with US presidential elections, and also to do with the amount of government stimulus that is coming through. And while that is indirectly to do with COVID-19, it is likely to remain a debt on government balance sheets for many years after the pandemic has ended. The second risk to highlight is on the short-term asset values. So this is where we have just seen volatile, particularly equity markets in terms of investment returns, and with government debt having low interest rates has affected our bond holdings. Also worth noting that property is quite difficult to value at the moment because there hasn't been much movement in the markets, and the way property funds are valued is based on comparable property sales and the prices of those sales. So as you can imagine, if there aren't many sales, it's very hard to assess what an estimated sale figure may be. I'll come on to that later in the investment subcommittee paper. The active management that we have in our portfolio means that managers have to show a lot of skill and judgment in turbulent markets, and that's a risk that where there's a higher likelihood of loss, equally there's a higher likelihood of gain relative to passive. So just want to flag fraud. As you may be aware, there's a lot more online, for instance, this kind of board meeting, and with that there are increased instances of cyber attacks, phishing, and essentially the risk has increased, although the council and the fund and investment managers all have steps in place to try and mitigate where possible. But human error is the one that's quite hard to avoid. Risk 7, liabilities increase. Again, going back to the low long-term government bond yields that we're currently experiencing, given the way that the liabilities are valued, the valuation on liabilities has increased as a result of lower interest rates. This is something that we have no influence over, but it is worth noting that that is a theoretical increase. And so long as members' longevity and benefit payments remain unchanged, then the actual payments that the pension fund makes shouldn't be changed, just the way that they are valued and shown in the funding strategy. Does anyone have any questions on the general risk register before we go on to the COVID-19 one? Sorry, Keith, you're on mute.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay.
No, I think you've done well there. Carry on, please, Victoria.
The COVID-19 risk register in Table 2. You can see that this is quite an orange and red mix. Luckily, the red is more on the left-hand side than the right-hand side. So this was our assessment at the beginning of the pandemic versus a more recent reference. And this is the same reference that was taken to the Investment Subcommittee and Staff and Pensions Committee. You'll note that the loss in investment values and returns remains at 12. And it's worth potentially flagging that the reason why there have been some decreases from March to August has been due to our experience of systems holding up and the fact that there seems to be resilience, both within the pension fund at the council level and also within wider markets. Does anyone have any questions on any of those items?
The floor is yours, members. If anybody has any comment or question, or any questions to put to Victoria.
Yeah, just one quick one, Chair. I mean, is the likely outcome of Brexit, is that likely to have more impact than we sort of recognise at the moment, or is there separate work being done on that?
So we have some UK equities, and the majority of our UK equities actually see their returns from overseas trading. So it's not just UK trading. So Brexit's actually could only impact a small part of our portfolio if we think it's a UK specific risk. There has been work historically done mainly by the investment managers rather than the pension fund itself, given that they have greater research and resource capabilities in that area. So we are trusting that our investment managers, where they are active managers rather than passive managers, are making appropriate risk-adjusted decisions. Does that help?
Yes, I think it does. When you say investment managers, what about Board of the Coast? Are they doing anything on that?
Yes, so one of our holdings with them is in the UK Alpha Fund, and this is a UK Equity Global Alpha Fund, UK Equity Alpha Fund, and that is comprised of several underlying fund managers. So it's still managed by investment managers other than Board of the Coast. However, Board of the Coast as the pool does have an assessment of how each of those UK fund managers' portfolios is positioned. The positioning has probably already taken place, given that Brexit has been on the table for several years now, and the nuances of a deal no deal have historically been considered. I suppose we're now coming to the stage where that's going to potentially materialise one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, could I make a comment, please, Keith? I'm looking at, I don't know, it's the chart where it's got actions in place and that sort of thing. Can I put it up there?
Which page, Keith?
Well, it's 1 of 5 of the appendices.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say, under the actions, it seems very strange to me, just looking at them, that the actions are very, if I could say this, weak. They are, it's sort of just saying, well, we just carry on and we've got good chaps looking at it and that's all right.
Keith, could you cite a specific instance on a specific page just to illustrate the point you're making?
Well, it is the page 1. On that, the first one, which is long-term returns, fail to be in line with assumptions. It says, for instance, liaise under further risk actions. It says liaise with Border to Coast to ensure appropriate investment vehicles are available. That distinctly lacks any detail. I mean, what do you mean? Do you mean we're going to go into more fixed than variable? Does it mean we're going to go into more bonds than in equities? Does it mean we go abroad rather than in the UK? Or the mix of things. There's nothing in there about that, and I'm just surprised.
So to help with that, we Chris, do you want to say something, or should I answer first?
Just one brief comment is I welcome your comments, Keith. One of the features of the risk register is summarising the position and making judgments about how much detail to put in. We can put more detail in. We can get back to you on any particular concerns you've got offline as well.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm assuming there is a lot more because
to answer your specific example. To answer your specific example on Border to Coast and how we liaise with them to ensure appropriate investment vehicles are in place, we have, as a pension fund, independent financial advisors who have significant expertise in investment management. And we also have external consultants who also are FCA registered. And between the officers and these two particular advisors, we have discussions with Border to Coast. Now, it's not just Warwickshire as a partner fund. There are 10 other partner funds who also have a similar set of experienced investment professionals who are answering very, very similar questions, as you can appreciate. So that means that there is a significant amount of conversation going on with Border to Coast to ensure that appropriate measurement is taken place. In addition to that, Border to Coast is run by people with professional expertise in investment management, who again are considering these items as part of their day-to-day job.
But of course, but that's saying we'll just be hands off and just let the experts do it. In which case, there's little point in getting them in once a quarter and asking them for their performance because they're experts. So what have we got to do with it? And yet we do, of course. That's all I say. So there is no. Are you telling me that there is no change of strategy going to happen? The investment strategy remains the same despite this.
So the investment strategy is set on long-term values and assumptions. So it is a long-term setup. Therefore, we have to work out whether something is a short-term impact, and therefore we can ride it out, or whether it is of longer-term seismic value change. In this instance, we actually have a strategy discussion coming up later this week, which is with all of the before-mentioned experts, and it is specifically to look at our strategy. We have had strategic conversations as part of the 2019 valuation procedure, and that put in place a new investment strategy statement. Because of the market changes of 2020, there has been a consideration of whether our strategy needs to change for a long-term or medium-term position. But we are a long-term investor, and therefore things like equity market turbulence. Actually, if you look at the US S&P 500, it is now higher than it was in January 2020, as an example of, yes, sometimes that is just a short-term thing and emotional responses aren't appropriate. Does that help?
Can I say I would like to echo that. I mean, it is long-term business for it. I mean, when I was more involved at the coalface with pension fund management, and I'm going back quite a few years, more than 20 years, it was great fun calling in the fund managers every quarter and giving them a kicking if they weren't doing well. You know, it was a bit of a blood sport. But frankly, it didn't necessarily achieve very much. And increasingly, people have become aware, and I've become aware, that one has to keep the eye on the long term. In fact, many funds, they don't really review their fund managers or, more often than annually, because they think that otherwise it's counterproductive. And that's been the case for quite a few years, and I think that's been growing. Obviously, the market at the moment, I mean, the big uncertainty we all know is COVID, but there are other uncertainties as well. We've got global warming, we've got the usual international pressures that can pop up anywhere, anytime. We've got the US presidential election and so on. So I think foreseeing the future and reacting to changes in the short term is very problematical, and anybody who thinks they can do that to good effect, in my view, is probably suffering from self-delusion to some extent. You just have to stand back and take a view of your long-term strategy, and hopefully that will be right. But you do need to keep it under review, as we do. So those are my views for what they're worth. But does anybody else have any comments or questions?
I just want to come back on that just for a second. I'm not going to argue with the point you made, because generally speaking, I think you're quite right. What I was just saying is we have learned today that we are actually considering the investment, looking at the investment strategy. So I mean, that isn't said on here.
Indeed, Keith. No, it was a good point you raised. I wasn't creating the point. I mean, we're here to do this. And, as always, you know, you're fulfilling that function quite properly and well.
Chris,
Okay, we're not disagreeing. Okay. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Chair, we've got Councillor Singberdy's got his hand up. Chris Norton also has a hand up.
Okay, we'll take the board member first, Councillor.
Chair, on the last point, I was just assuming that the Pension Fund Investment Committee looks at that point more in detail than we do. Would that be true? You know, then it might be that that bit of the papers might be circulated to this board, so Keith is aware of what's going on in the background.
Well, I certainly hope so, because they get information that we don't get, you know, and that's been another debate. But I certainly hope that's the case. Over to you, Chris.
A couple of points of context if they're helpful. In the modelling that the actuaries do in the valuation, the experience that we've had with COVID is within the scenarios that were modelled. We did think about the strategy and whether our experience was breaking outside of that. If you go back to the lockdown and when COVID was coming up to us, and there was no assessed need at that time to revisit the strategy. We're looking at it now, but the investment subcommittee will always review the strategy from time to time for various reasons. So I don't know if that's helpful as a bit of context.
Yeah, well, I find it so. Okay, thank you, Chris. Any other comments or questions, please? And this is on item 5, risk monitoring, before we move on.
In that case, I'll note to include, where possible, reference to what the ISC has done in the minutes that you receive, which, once we've had the strategy conversation, would then follow through into the next set of ISC minutes.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, thank you. In that case, I think we can now move on to the next item, which I think is you again, Victoria, and this is the business plan monitoring.
So I should just flag on that we wouldn't necessarily be able to give you details of the outcome of it, but the fact that it has happened could be included. So on to item 6. This is the business plan monitoring. I suggest that we go through this and discuss the amber points. If anyone would like to discuss any points other than the amber points, please do let me know.
Well, certainly I was going to suggest that, but certainly if others have any comments, they're free to raise them. But yes, if you do that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to page 46, item 7. We've already referred to the annual benefit statements and the response that the pension fund took, and that it has been found satisfactory by the pensions regulator, and that we now have issued those statements. On page 47, item 12, there is the conversation that's, sorry, Keith, you're on mute. You're on mute, Keith Francis. No? Okay. On item 12, the payroll function, as discussed previously, these are monthly meetings and the conversation around service level agreements is ongoing. Item 15, the employer contribution performance. This is something that is monitored, and we are hoping to see improvements in both our monitoring of it and also in the payments of it, which links on to item 16. This is the employer covenant review work that we have planned as a pension fund, which will be picked up by my colleague Neil later on in this board meeting. I suggest that comments are raised then, but if there's anything you feel that urgently needs raising now, please feel free to do so. Moving on through the register to page 51, item 31. This is a review of contracts for services provided. I should note that there are still some contracts to put onto the contracts database. However, we have made significant progress. There are some contracts that we are currently in the process of putting out procurement due to the fact that they have expired or are about to expire by the end of 2020. We believe that these contracts that are of significant financial value or significant impact to the fund will be renewed in time for the start of 2021. This has been very time consuming in terms of resource use. Our expectation is that the majority of the resource use is in the one-off instance of putting a contract on or providing training to the relevant personnel in how to procure a contract. However, actually, the process of contract procurement does use considerable time if it's intended to be done diligently. Item 35 is the next item on page 52, that's amber. This is covering the commissioning and delivery approach that is part of the Council's wider review at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. There is a delineation within the pension fund on delivery and commissioning roles. However, due to the fact that I'm going to say a couple of us, definitely me, are new to this particular setup, we are still working on who's taking responsibility for which items. Luckily, it's a very collaborative team, and so that means there are open conversations about resource requirements, even if someone technically might not have a commissioning role per se, and that seems to work more effectively than no one taking the lead in asking for resources where needed. Item 36 is the rolling review of policies. We now have a fairly coherent schedule of policies, which is an attachment to the ISC papers, and also to be picked up by my colleague Neil later on. There are a lot of policies, and again on resources, we note that there is definitely an initial time cost to reviewing all of these policies, and there will also be an ongoing time cost, particularly where there are new policies to be implemented and thought about. So those are resource usage that the pension fund currently has some strain on. Does anyone have any comments on the business plan?
I have a question. On point 35 about the draft commissioning delivery approach, that's not something I really understand. It sounds like it's a change to the way you operate, and it sounds like it's something that we as a pension board should be taking an interest in, as one of our functions is to try and assist you with efficient and effective operation.
Yes, I'll pass over to Chris, who has more knowledge in this area than me.
Thanks for your question, Alan. So perhaps if I explain a bit of the background. If you go back to the administrating authority, so the county council restructure, one of the principles of that was moving towards being more of a commissioning organisation, and one of the tenets of commissioning being putting a bit of a split or division of duties between planning and operating, or strategy and delivery. There's different ways of articulating it. So for different bits of the county council, this was expressed in different ways. for the finance service, a number of transactional services were identified as having that in common and being grouped together side by side. So, for example, what you'd call accounts payable, accounts receivable, adult social care charging, pensions administration service are all transactional by nature. So in the new structure, they're all together, and we get the benefits of having things of a similar nature side by side. And so the administration and governance side of the pension fund is slightly separate in the structure. So where Liz Firmstone and I fit in is Liz line manages the pensions admin team and the other transactional services, and also other things within finance. I line manage the investment side of the pension fund and also the overarching governance. So how that works in practice is predominantly you will see Liz Firmstone and Vicky Jenks presenting on things that are mostly administrative in nature, or the direct admin stuff. You generally see Victoria Moffat and myself when we're talking about investments, the investment subcommittee, and you'll generally see Neil Buxton, Victoria, and myself when we're talking about generic governance arrangements. So the commissioning and delivery split has arisen from that starting point. How that looks in practice is that, for example, being specific, Neil Buxton helping us with governance is looking at ensuring that we've got that list of policies. So a commissioning function is, do you have all the policies that you need to have? Are they up to date? Have they been appropriately reviewed? Hence, later on in this agenda, you'll see the scheduled policy reviews. So the governing and commissioning function will think about, have we got everything covered? Then when you've got a specific policy to express a particular set of actions and achieve certain objectives, it might be someone in the administration team or the investment side that delivers that policy. So if you take dealing with employers and policies to do with employers, the governance function, the commissioning function will think about, what should our policies be? What should our admin strategy be? Our funding strategy be? They won't sit in the dark room and work on their own, and they liaise with the admin team and advisors and other stakeholders. But they would hold a ring on, what should our policy be? Is it working? But then when it comes to delivering that on the ground, it would be the admin team, in the case of the administration strategy, dealing with employers, training them, making sure that they're giving us the right data, doing something about it if they're not, that kind of a thing. And the last thing I say about it is, so Vicky Jenks, Victoria, Liz and I are having discussions about next year's budget and the medium-term outlook for resourcing for the pension fund. This is something that we've never done before, but having the commissioning and delivery split helps to kind of make us realise that we've got to look forwards and we've got to think about where we're going. Because when you split strategy and delivery, the theory is, doesn't always work, but the theory is it's supposed to give you more time to give attention to strategy because you're not constantly pulled by the day-to-day of delivery. So we have had conversations which we've never had before, thinking forwards, things like, what are the things pushing and pulling on the need for resources for next year? So for example, if we get eye-connecting on the ground, will that make things more efficient and therefore we need less staff? Would we reduce our staff, or would we take that space and reinvest it in improving data quality? And we can tell you the latter is, where our heads are at. If you look at the long-term changes in demand for the pension fund, so if you go back to the AGM last year, remember those charts showing that slow but unrelenting increase in membership in employer numbers, rather than that growing in the background and hitting the performance of the fund in a way that we weren't even seeing. We're thinking about where's that going in the future. It looks like employer numbers have leveled out actually this year, but membership is growing and growing. So what does that mean for resources for the admin team in future? When should we be thinking about adding new staff in, or thinking about the productivity of our systems and our processes? So that's a little bit of a run through of where it came from and the kinds of things that we're doing with it. But the last thing I'd say is that the county council, bits of it have done commissioning for decades. So for example, if you work in social care, the government forced that into a commissioning state decades ago through how it dealt with the funding. The NHS has been commissioning for a long time. Police commissioners are there. Bits of the county council, including the pension fund, are relatively new to it. So how myself, Liz, Vicky and Victoria are working is collaboratively. We're brand new to this. it will take a few years for what we do to mature. And as the years go by, hopefully we'll settle into something where we've got more formal roles and we can be more distinct. But right now we have to work quite closely together and take a team approach.
You sound quite positive about it, Chris.
Well, there's lots of different ways of doing things. The important thing is whatever way we do it, try and do that good and not bad. So we're going to take the benefits of this and try and make the most of them.
Yeah, commissioning at first reading sounds a bit like outsourcing, but it's a bit more complicated than that, clearly.
It's agnostic about who does what. And, you know, there's pros and cons to it. There's lots of different approaches with different pros and cons. But this is the approach that we're taking. So we need to make the best of it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Victoria. Does any board member or anybody else have any other comment or any questions to put, please? Okay, if not, we'll move to the next item, which is
Keith Francis.
I
keep having trouble with the mute. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I was the same, Keith. I think somebody's muting us.
I got so excited earlier on, I went out of the meeting completely. But I just wanted to, I'm sorry, to hark back to set point 7, only that I think we agreed earlier that the deferred pensioners' benefit statements was a red item, and therefore I assume that either this item or another item will take it under control, yeah? Good. Now, can I say, Victoria, you're on mute now?
Thanks, Keith. Yes, that would be an appropriate assumption. The classic refrain of 2020.
Okay, so have we, I'm supposed to be sharing this, but I'm getting lost now. Have we finished item 7? Any other comments or questions on item 7? Okay, if not, thank you, Victoria, again. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, members, for comments. Alan, Paminda, and Keith. Okay, now back to you, Victoria. I think you're doing item 8 as well, external audit of pension fund accounts.
I believe Chris is going to
Also,
take
this is me, Keith, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I should have looked at my prompt.
I think that I am meant to be taking the investments update item 7 first, though.
Oh, I've jumped one. I beg your pardon. I apologise. I apologise. Yeah, okay. I get item 7. I beg your pardon.
That's right. Thank you. So this is a rundown of the investments progress over the 3 months to really 30th of June. You'll note that we have got a slightly more recent funding level update for you. So that is to state that the funding level as at mid-August was approximately 83%. This does indicate that it has fallen since the triennial valuation in 2019, and that was primarily due to falling gilt yields over the 18 months to mid-August. In terms of the asset values, they have recovered significantly from the initial phase of COVID-19. However, there are still higher volatility levels in markets than at calmer periods, say in 2019 even. With the growth assets, I've summarised what we're invested in. Similarly with our income and protection assets. As mentioned before, with the income assets, the property values have had difficulties putting valuations on them. There's something called a material uncertainty clause, which the surveyors issue, stating that there's a lack of valuation data. Both of our property funds have now reopened and are now trading, and we will soon receive the most recent valuation data to 30th of September, but I don't yet know what that is because it hasn't yet been issued by the investment managers. With the protection update, there have been good cash flows. We continue to see a netting of benefits payments with income, with contributions. So that means that the fund is essentially running a neutral cash flow position. Therefore, assets do not need to be disinvested nor particularly invested. So asset movements would just be due to changes to strategic asset allocation or implementation of the existing investment strategy statement. For instance, where we have private market assets and managers are calling on capital. Pooling, as you're aware, Audit Costs is our pooled property fund. Continue to input on their fund development schedule. There have been regular meetings, probably weekly rather than fortnightly, on each of the underlying sub-funds that Audit Costs offer to their partner funds. The ISC also receives a quarterly update giving an aggregate monetary value to the benefits realised through pooling. There are also less financially specific items that are improved through pooling, and these are also discussed. For instance, better access to expertise in environmental, social and governance policy. In terms of the audit, there was an internal audit carried out in April 2019 and then reissued in August 2020, which has shown a moderate assurance opinion. The action plan has actually now been completed, and we are due to provide that to the internal audit function in the upcoming few weeks. So we'll report back on any change to audit opinions as a result of providing that extra information. The external audit is the next item on the agenda. So on that note, does anyone have, so we'll pick that up there if you have any specific questions, I suggest. Final item for note in this report is the voting record. I appreciate that you may want to have additional information on the voting record and would refer you to Audit Costs website, where they publicly state how they have voted over the previous quarter. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Is there any questions or comments from board members, please?
I have.
Alan?
Thank you for your report, Victoria. It all seemed fine to me. I would like to broach an issue which I feel is missed off the report, and I'll go into it in a little detail for the benefit of people who are new to the board. When the whole pooling thing was about to kick off, I believe the government really were encouraging pension funds to try and put a benchmark in the sand and try and establish the investment costs. And that's what I'd like to talk about, investment costs and cost transparency. So that the government, I think, wanted funds to have some idea of what the costs were, so that after pooling, they could see whether they progressed and reduced their costs, and if so, by how much. And then about 2 to 3 years ago, we had the local Lgps code of transparency, which they were trying to get investment managers to all sign up to. And now, I think probably about a year or so ago, we've now got the Cost Transparency Initiative, which I believe is trying to equip pension funds with the tools that they need to analyse their cost data. So I'm wondering where Warwickshire Fund is with all of this, whether we've got measures in place to see how we've progressed pre and post pooling, and what actions are we taking as a fund to get a handle on the hidden costs of investments?
That's an excellent question.
Excuse me a second. I see that Sean has his hand up as well, but we'll let you deal with Alan's point first, and then we'll come back to Sean. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, cost transparency has very much been a regulator's initiative. The investment managers that we have assets with have signed up to the template, which has been issued. There are some nuances in how we present that information and how much detail we go into and who we provide that detail to, in terms of actually board time as much as committee time, as much as is that aggregate data that I mentioned that Hyman's produce in the investment quarterly report, is that sufficient in terms of giving the investment costs? Now, we are working with them to make some updates to it, but broadly, it sets out what the fees were for each underlying manager before pooling and what those fees are following pooling with those particular asset classes. So we do have both a percentage change value as well as an aggregate monetary value. So I think that we do already provide some information on that. And actually, it's quite a good level of information in terms of being digestible. If you do wish to find out more about details of costs, we'll need to work out what it is that is useful and how best to present it, because it gets very, very technical. So happy to hear ideas.
That's good to hear. And I think from my point of view, it'd be nice to have something in your investment report there to give us some indication of where we're at and the direction of travel and whether it's significant numbers and that kind of thing. I appreciate what you're saying about detail, but at the moment we have nothing.
Potentially, and this is a thought for maybe offline discussion, we can include just the aggregate cost. I'm aware that maybe investment managers' fees shouldn't be put in a domain that can be publicly accessed because they just competitive nature of investment managers' fees. Potentially the aggregate saving or cost, it's a saving at present, could be included, but please don't hold me to that. I need to check what we can provide. That seems like a potential point of information that would be acceptable.
Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah, I think Alan's quite right to raise this. This was a big issue, and with COVID, I'm sure it's been there, still being pursued, but it's not been so much in the headlines as it was a year or so ago. I do recall, I can't remember the precise figures, but the West Midlands Pension Fund, which is a very much larger fund than the Warwickshire Fund, but several years ago, and I'm going back 4 or 5 years, I think, they were quoting their investment costs as being something less than 10 million. And then when they did a thorough examination of all the costs, trading costs, stamp duties and everything else, and the whole shebang, it wasn't less than 10 million, it was of the order of 80 million. So the difference between what had in the past sometimes been recorded as costs and reality was very, very significant. And it was that sort of situation that added and gave greater impetus to this drive for more transparency. So I think if at some stage, not necessarily the next meeting, I don't think, we leave that with the officers, but I think if we can have this revisited sometime and have some further explanation, I think that would be helpful, and I would support Alan in his views on that. Sean, you raised your hand, and Chris has his hand raised, but Sean first, please.
Okay, Vicky, page 53, paragraph 2. I'm sure everyone else knows the answer to this. I'm the only person, but when you say that as of the 13th of August 2020, this was approximately 83%, that's 83% of the overall funding level. What is that referring to?
Can I help on that, Sean? And if I'm incorrect, because I might be quicker because I know less than Victoria about it. She's an actuary, but so the man who knows less will hopefully talk a bit less. But basically, obviously the long-term aim is the funds to have 100% funding, which basically means you have enough money in the fund to pay all your future liabilities. So that's the long-term aim. Over time, valuations move about. I think if you look back at the minutes, back before COVID, the fund was about 93% funded, according to the actuary. Now, there are 4 actuarial firms serving the local government pension scheme. They have slightly different approaches, and the ones that we use at Warwickshire, Hyman's Robinson, are seen as the most conservative. So if they say you're 93%, or in this case, 83% funded, it's extremely unlikely that any other actuary would say you're less well funded. One of the fund actuaries is a bit less conservative, and so the funds that use that value actually might find that they appear to be better funded than, say, we are, but perhaps that wouldn't be the case if they were judged on a level playing board. And in that context, central government a few years ago brought in a so-called Section 13 assessment, whereby all the valuations were looked at by the government actually on a consistent basis to try to get consistency. And certainly, as I recall, our valuations then under the government actuaries basis went up. So what the 83% refers to, it's the fund has 83% of the money it needs at that point in time to meet future liabilities. And the funding strategy statement looks forward in 15, 20, 19, 20 years ahead to try to make sure that ultimately you will always have the money you need. Again, some funds get closer to being into cash flow negativity, where they're paying up more than they're getting in, that you're getting closer to that. But I don't think that's a problem for us at the moment. Victoria or Chris can say something on that. And of course, again, you look at the difference between the money being paid in by contributors, by members, and by employers, as what three elements of money coming in, basically: the employers' contributions, the employees' contributions, and then the investment dividends and returns and so on, as opposed to the increase in capital value of investments.
To help with this, should I maybe provide a separate training session on actuarial valuations, Sean? Would that be useful? And we can just go through in 20 minutes, half an hour, and how actuaries on an approximate level evaluation, so what that figure means.
That'll be helpful. But in simple terms, I can understand it like this, that the believed liabilities for 15 to 20 years, as they're assessed, 83% of that is funded today.
So if you look
in
at
simple
the
terms, so I've got a simple idea.
Yeah, so the expected pensioner payments in the future,
Yeah,
they are discounted to a present value. So that gives you your net present value of the liabilities. We have the current value of the assets, and the difference between the net present value of liabilities and the current value of the assets gives you the funding ratio.
and the present situation is that contributions broadly match payments out.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, you happy with that, Sean?
I am.
I hope I didn't steal your thunder there, Victoria, and I hope. Do you want to correct anything that I said?
No, I think that was an excellent summary. Thank you very much. I was just aware that it might be easier if you want to have questions separately.
Chris, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Just a couple of other comments on the question of fees and cost savings. One is the county council, the Warwickshire Pension Fund, is one of the smaller funds within our pool. One of the things this means is we've got more to gain than the larger funds in certain respects. So we're a smaller fund, we've got less capacity, so we get more of the benefits of the economies of scale and the concentration of expertise in the pool that some of the larger funds get. We also, in certain funds, have more to gain in terms of improving the costs. Some larger funds have gone into some investments where they haven't saved much because they've already got low fees. And the other comment just to add is, as Victoria says, we'll have to review what we can report publicly. But one of the things that we report to the investment subcommittee is savings that we made through negotiating lower fees before we actually went into the pool. So some funds reduced their fees knowing what was coming, and we incorporate that in the big picture. So we can make sure that we reflect that, but articulate it as being a distinct kind of saving from actual savings from actual funds going into the actual pool.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Do we have any other questions or comments on this item 7?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Very straightforward one. You mentioned a couple of times you've mentioned internal audit reports and the fact that the second one was better than the first. Could you just briefly tell me what the categories You said they moved from whatever it is, X to Y, but can you tell me what the different levels are, please?
Yes, so we've got 4 levels of assurance. You have limited, moderate, substantial and full. And if you look at the internal audit function across local authorities generally, they'll generally have those 4 categories are fairly typical. Sometimes it can be slightly different.
Okay, and so it's gone up. The one that we were looking at, whatever that was, and I don't really want to talk about it, I just want to understand it. It went from, was it limited to moderate?
Yes. So
it went from the bottom one to the next to bottom one?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got some way to go. That's and what one other aside, and that's all it wants to be, is page 54, 4.4, private equity and private debt managers consider their portfolios to be robust. Well, I'm a little sceptical, but that's it. Move on.
That's fine, Keith. We have had meetings with each of our managers, and the nature of private debt is that they have greater control of the companies that they are invested in, usually with board representation. So
it doesn't help the companies, though, does it? I mean, the companies could well go down the pan.
No, it means that they have a good feel for how the company is faring, and they provided us with an impact assessment of COVID-19 on their portfolio, stating which ones have been affected, which ones have been slightly affected, and which ones are unaffected or even benefit. So having done a little bit of investigation on the underlying portfolio, that seems to be a fair reflection.
Well, one last point could I make, and this is, I could have made it almost at any point in today's meeting, and we've made it before, which is about audit reports. And I believe, as a right, we should get audit reports, whether they be internal or external, that actually have looked at any aspect of pensions, and particularly the administration.
Noted. Thank you.
Yeah, I would support Keith on that. I mean, if there's a report, I mean, and we can either have we're always a bit worried, or we complain when we get lots of paper, but I think we can have consultations about that. And if there are audit reports on the pension fund, then for the board not to see them, and we have raised this before. So we've been moving in the right direction. Chris, can I come back to you? The 4 levels, I've got limited, moderate and full, I think. What was the third one?
Limited, moderate, substantial and full.
Substantial. Yeah, I just wanted to get the wording down. Okay, thank you. Right. Anything else on that item, or can we move to item 8, which is external audit? Can we move to item 8? And that's going to be Victoria, I think, isn't it?
I think it's going to be Chris.
Okay,
Do we want to take a break at this stage? Or
I was just going to say it's 12:30. Does anybody would anybody like a 5-minute comfort break now? We've been going for about half an hour or just over. Does anybody want a comfort break, or are you all happy to carry on? Sounds as though we're happy to carry on. So let's carry on. If anybody does want to take a break at some time, please let us know. Hopefully we won't be too much longer. But over to you then, the next item 8. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just a short report to provide the board with some line of sight of the assurance that goes on around the pension fund accounts. So it's a relatively short report, and I've not included a copy of the actual accounts so as not to really duplicate the role that audit and standards have and all the other controls and processes that we have in place. So in summary, the accounts have been approved by Council on the 13th of October, subject to a few last bits of audit work being ticked off, but there's no significant issues to report, and we expect everything to be signed off soon. There was one emphasis of matter flagged by the auditors, which is around the valuation of property funds. So that doesn't mean there's a problem with the accounts. All it is the external auditors bringing to readers' attention the fact that there's a significant issue that they need to make sure that they keep in mind. So we have about £217 million of funds in 2 property funds, and they've been valued in a certain way. And we included in the accounts what we call a material uncertainty statement, basically meaning for the readers to keep in mind that we can't be as certain about those values as we normally would be. Since the balance sheet date, we get updates on the valuations from those fund managers, and it happens to be the case that those asset values haven't moved materially since March anyway. So there was no issue that required adjusting the figures in the accounts. One thing that we added to the council report for transparency off the back of comments from the Audit and Standards Committee was some remarks on the valuation funding level. So where we just talked about the 83% funding level, if you look at the annual accounts, that's a financial report following accounting standards. There is nothing in the balance sheet or the income and expenditure account that's required to remark on the funding level. The balance sheet just talks about the investment assets. Really, it doesn't talk about the long-term liabilities, which we talk about in the valuation. So in the report to the council, we did explain what's going on with the valuation level. In summary, if you go back to the 2006 valuation, it was about 82%. If you go forward to the 2019 valuation, which worked on December data, it was about 92%. Then if you go to the end of the financial year, it dropped down into the low 80s again because of COVID and the impacts on the markets. And then by summer, when we're working on finalising accounts, it bounced back up because of the rebound in the markets. So we added that into the covering report to council because it's not something that the accounts normally remark on. That's as much as I had to say by way of summary. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chris. Questions or comments, please? Mike?
Yeah, am I unmuted?
Can you hear you?
Muted again, Mike.
There's time delay with this computer here in muting and unmuting, unfortunately. So no, it's good to see the accounts on the verge of being properly signed off by the auditors. Just interested in, what were the sort of main challenges you had in getting those accounts prepared this time in the in this COVID environment that we're in, which obviously has impacted on everybody's workload here. And what, the main challenges you faced?
Yeah, from the pension fund side of things, we were able to do everything successfully remotely. I think the auditors had some challenges from their side in respect of if there's physical records that you want to look at and things you want to see in person. But ultimately, we've got to the point where things are signed off in good time, accepting that the deadlines got put back by the government, because of COVID. The things that really caused a challenge for the pension fund is the valuation of assets. When if you take property funds, the issue there was because trading activity stopped, you don't have comparators which you can use to value your own assets because nothing's happened elsewhere. There's no traffic. That's why there was material uncertainty there. And then with with other assets such as equities, with them moving around and being so volatile, that's another issue. But actually, in the end, we've gone through the external audit process. We've been able to meet all of the kind of requirements and expectations of the auditors, and there's no adjusting issues. There's no qualification to the accounts. And the key issue that's been flagged, as I said, is just to bring to readers' attention that the property valuations are quite uncertain compared to normal for reasons beyond our control.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, thank you. That's item 8. And so we'll now move to item 9, which are the minutes of our previous meeting on the 21st of July, which was obviously like this one online. And I have on the list here that Victoria might have something to say about that, but it's for the board to raise any questions or comments on the minutes. Victoria, did you want to say anything?
It was just that I was going to be the responsible officer for jotting down any notes. Chris, I noticed you've got your hand raised.
Okay, thank you.
Keith, just one comment from me was so we've mentioned earlier in the meeting about the accounts being approved and Sean being approved as a member of the local pension board. One other bit of feedback from the council is that they've approved the local pension board terms of reference, which you recall we looked at quite a while back, and they went through Staff and Pensions Committee also, but ultimately County Council gets to sign them off and say yes, that's it. So that's been through, and those are updated and in force now.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say one word on that? The old version is still on the website.
Okay, thanks. We'll make sure that that's amended.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, well, we have the minutes before us. I'll just go through them page by page, and if anybody wants to raise any points, please do. 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, and that's the lot. Can I say I'd like to thank Deborah. Deborah, I think, compiled these minutes, and when I saw them as draft minutes, because obviously they are only draft until they come to you today, I was very pleased with them and thought they were very good minutes and reflected our meeting very well. So may I thank you, Deborah, for that, and happy to have that minuted, in fact. I suggest what we do in future, because obviously we sometimes have long gaps between meetings, after the draft meeting minutes have been written, and I will agree them as draft minutes. We will then, once they're agreed, I think we could circulate them to board members earlier than we have been doing, and then also attach them again when the agendas come out. Now, I'm not going to be asking or indeed offering members of the board the right to alter the draft minutes. What I've approved will remain the draft minutes until we get to the meeting. Obviously, it will give you a chance to see the minutes in advance, and if you want to discuss anything with me, then you'll be free to do so. But they will remain the draft minutes, and if there are to be any corrections or amendments or additions, then that will be done when we next meet. But in that way, the draft minutes will be approved by me as drafts fairly early on, and once they're approved, they'll be circulated to members so they see them nearer to the date of the meeting than has been the case. Anybody got any comments, or are people happy with that approach?
Yeah, we can implement that. Should I just flag the summary of actions, which is a new table that's been added in, and
Yeah.
hopefully you're all pleased that we have actioned those points at some stage in this meeting.
Yes, that's something we did ask for. We said we wanted to do action points. I think it was Keith who first voiced this as an improvement that we should have, and I certainly picked up when we had the meeting of board members with Rob Powell. I think we discussed that there back 18 months or so ago, whenever it was, a year or so ago. Okay, so that's what we'll do in future. The minutes, and again, thank you to Deborah for them. I will then look at them, and I'll agree to the minutes as draft minutes with the officers, and then we'll circulate them initially as early as we can so that members can view them, and then they'll be circulated again for confirmation or otherwise with the agendas. Okay, thank you. That being so, we can move to agenda item 10. And I've got my list on of who's doing what on my iPad. It keeps locking me out. That's going to be Victoria again, and then Neil's going to be doing the next one. Thank you, Victoria.
Right, change of breath soon. So these are the investment subcommittee minutes, public minutes. Does anyone have any questions on them? Is there anything you would like me to discuss? Yes.
One question, Victoria. Page 76.
Yeah.
The LGPS pooling Benefits realisation review.
Mhm.
I think that's something I've practically touched on before, but I'm certainly interested in knowing how we benefited from pooling.
Yes, so that is the table that I referred to in the previous agenda item, setting out how the fund has benefited to date in terms of aggregate cost changes. And as previously agreed, we'll look at how to give the board some kind of assurance that that is both being reviewed and a rough estimate of what the impact is, so that you have that oversight.
Great, thank you.
I don't want to extend the debate this time, but as you know, I think I've had the view in the past that we don't see some information that we would find helpful to see on performance and so on. We're not here to second guess the investment subcommittee. They're the decision makers. We're not decision makers at all. But I think I would restate the view I expressed in the past that I think it would be helpful if we saw more of some of the actual meat, because quite frankly, quite often the stuff that we get is not particularly meaningful.
Perhaps we could do something useful, which is focus on the strategy, because actually the investment manager's performance has a very relatively less significant impact than the strategy. So strategic classification.
As we discussed earlier, yeah, you're echoing our conversation of earlier, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
yes. Just for reference for the rest of the board. Potentially we could try and give you a bit of a strategic asset allocation overview, so you can see how the fund is invested, even if you don't see which particular managers are running which particular sleeve.
Because we get performance eventually in the annual report, don't we? We get something there on performance, obviously.
Yes, historic, yeah.
Yeah. And as I say, we're taking a long-term view. So we're still on agenda. Gosh, I have to keep putting my code into my iPad to get the list. But we're still on the item 10. Any other comments on that? If not, we can move on. And I think Neil is now going to come on board for the Staff and Pensions Committee.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Victoria. Welcome, Neil.
I've been allowed out of my darkened room, as Keith referred to, as Chris referred to it. So, first item is the review of the minutes of the Staff and Pensions Committee, the meeting which took place on the 8th of June. Anybody has any comments? Just to show that these are an abridged version of the items that were discussed by Staff and Pensions that refer specifically to pensions, the pension fund. The full version of the public minutes are available online if anybody should want to have a look at them.
But that's because the Staff and Pensions Committee looks after all staff and pensions issues.
That's right.
Yeah. And obviously many of which, well, most of which we have no interest in at all.
That's right. So I always kind of pull together an edited version.
But it's not edited in terms of what they discussed regarding pensions. It's just giving us just the pension bit.
That's right.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? There's some detail on pages 89 to 91. No questions, no comments? In that case, Neil, thank you. And I think you're doing the next item 12 as well, aren't you?
I have. It's all me now, I'm afraid. Yes, this is what Chris was and Victoria referring to earlier. how we're going to look at the assessing employers on a covenant review. Go down to item 4 of the report. It gives the reasons why we're doing this, demonstrating good governance, obviously, providing management information to prioritise and engage higher risk employers. And we have an action plan of how we would take this forward in the appendix as well. I mean, some members of the board may recall that back in 2017 that we did identify a number of employers that were a risk to the fund because they were struggling to pay deficit payments or contacting the fund about contributions they were being asked to pay. And the board will recall that we did take support these in a way that we assisted their exit from the fund. So that is in some ways helped the fund with what were the higher risk third tier employers. But you'll see in the appendix that we go through the different types of the scheme employer, which we referred to in the training session yesterday. So I'm sure you're all fully versed with what these ones are now. And what our next step is to try and start to look at particular areas where we can ensure that we've got better governance in place. So the employers to ensure that all the admission agreements are up to date and relevant and fit for purpose, as we refer to. Identify employers where we may want to get bonds or security in place because we think they are higher risk. Just looking at my notes now, I think what the known unknown, which is the biggest issue for us, is COVID at the moment. So, for example, there may be some employers that we would have considered particularly secure in the past, but COVID may be having an impact on them. I know employers are able to approach the administration team in case they have got any concerns about paying contributions over, and I'm not aware that any have done that at the moment. But part of this review will encompass, I should imagine, like a RAG system where we look at red, amber, green on the employers in the fund. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. Questions or comments, please?
Will this also be a routine board meeting item or not?
I'm sure it can be, yeah.
Well, I mean, I happen to think this is quite an important area.
Yes.
And I think it should if it could.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can certainly update you on progress, Keith.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it'll affect it turn out to be. I think I agree with Keith. I mean, these can be short reports, and obviously exception reporting. Anything of major interest can be flagged up to us. That's the thing, really. I think we need to know what we need to know, and so on. So that would be good. Okay.
I think, as I said before, the fund is in a pretty good position, really. Because of the exercise we underwent back in 2017-18.
Yes, indeed. Well, as you were saying yesterday, and I think that's not necessarily the case with all funds. So I think that's to be applauded. So well done, Chris. You've raised your hand.
Yeah, just a quick comment. So yeah, we can consider how to bring this back to the board on an ongoing basis. It may be that it may be something that benefits from its own report, or it may be that we'll be reporting naturally on employer issues with the administration update, but one way or another we can do that.
Thank you. Everybody happy with that? If not, are there any comments or questions? Okay, so I think we concluded item 12. We're making good progress now. Tempting fate. Item 13, cyber. Is that right? Is that the next one?
Yeah, item 13, cyber policy. The fund is looking at putting in place a specific cyber policy that relates to the fund in its own entity. At the moment, we're pretty reliant on the county council for, and rightly so, for all the supports for our systems, etc. But what we've done is identify a policy, but we've also created an action plan as to how we will take this forward. And to go down to Appendix, if I can get there, I'm just moving through the report, if you can bear with me a moment. What we've done is identify what steps we need to take going forward. And to be honest, I think we will need some external support on this as well as the internal ICT. I think we will need to get some sort of specific consultancy support to review the cyber policy and what actions we have in place and what we do, and to ensure that we have a regular review for, let's say, reports on breaches, potential breaches, and that type of thing. Okay, but I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Just a quick one on item 6. Cybersecurity seems to be so important, and it's a long lead time. I mean, is that December 2021? Is there a technical reason for it, or I mean, I would have thought it was a bit more urgent than that.
We can certainly progress it further, more hastily. Yeah, I think so. December 21 does seem quite long. Yeah.
Part of the reason for the timescales is trying to be realistic about what's physically doable, and the fact that we need to rely on some expertise to bring in. We can try and bring this forward, but December 2021 is the idea behind that is the date when we've got everything in place. Some things will be in place before then, so that will be everything at that point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Faminda. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Can I just ask, have there thus far been any cyber breaches?
Sorry, Sean, could you say that again, please?
Thus far, have there been any cyber breaches?
No.
No. So this is not in response to something that's happened. It's just a good idea.
No, it's the pension regulator has kind of asked all pension funds, private sector, public sector, to make sure that they have a specific policy in place. Like everywhere else, we all get phishing emails and all that type of thing. But no, there's been no specific breaches of systems for the fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Neil. Anything else? If not, then I think, again, the next item is you again, Neil, and this is the schedule of policies. So,
yeah, as was referred to earlier, we're now identifying all our policies and I've produced a schedule of those and when we intend to review them. Obviously, there will be time to time where regulations will be issued that will impact on these. Excuse me. As I referred to yesterday, we had the Amending Regulations that have come out in September that will have an impact on the funding strategy statement and the admissions and termination policy. And that's by way of an example that they will need reviewing. We're waiting specific guidance from the Scheme Advisory Board and central government on how to, what changes need to be made. So we're waiting for those and they will go through to the March 21 Staff and Pensions Committee, and obviously, we will share those with the board as well. I think it was probably Andy who said when he was looking at this that he's conscious of the fact that we have quite a bit that hits specific times of the year. So we may look at this schedule and see if we can do some movement so we haven't got peaks and troughs to spread the workload a bit more.
Yeah, it makes sense that we can face things so that it sort of manages the resources appropriately. As long as we're hitting the statutory deadlines or any key deadlines for when individual policies should be reviewed by, then I think we might be able to around that.
Thanks,
Yes,
Andy.
good idea. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks very
Have you finished, Neil?
I have, yeah. Any questions?
Okay, question. It's a long list, a lot of stuff here. Any questions or comments from board members? Mike?
Right, just getting it unmuted. No, thank you. As you say, it is a substantial list. The one that probably stands out and sort of is the fund discretions, which of course comes down to all the various employers producing all their policies, and of course across there you've got sort of TBAs. So I just wonder what the actions will be in terms of trying to engage with employers and ensure that they have all those policies and keeping them up to date.
Well, yeah. I mean, you'll remember a meeting we had many years ago, Mike, when we formulated the discussions for Warwick District Council, didn't we? This is an area that funds have particular problems with. Good employers will give you their discretion policy statements. Unfortunately, there's a lot of employers who don't even see the need of it, to be quite honest. And when you're dealing with smaller parish councils or what have you, just to give them by way of an example, very rarely would a parish clerk have any concern at all about having discretions for the parish council that they represent. So what we tend to do, and not trying to put words into Vicky's mouth on this, but periodically we will remind employers that they need to have this discussions policy in place. We do send them a copy of the county councils, and again, some employers will come back and say merely that they've adopted those. So it's a battle, to be honest, and one that the admin team does approach from time to time.
Okay, thanks, Neil.
Yes, it's a relatively small part of the sort of administration process, but it can sometimes be very sensitive because of the discretionary nature of it. Any other comments? I should perhaps mention, I didn't really introduce the other members of the board to you, Sean, but you may know that Mike is Chief Financial Officer at Warwick District Council. Is that right, Mike? Have I entitled you properly?
Head of Finance, the official title, but
okay, there we are. Okay, and I think you know the others. I mean, the other Keith, he's an accountant, and then Alan, of course, is a scheme member representative, and then we have the two councillors. Dave, I think, is there as a scheme member representative, and Parminder as an employer representative. So that's the full list. Right, we're virtually there. Any other comments, questions on this particular item? I've not had any notice of any other business, so depending if anybody does have it, I'll reserve the right to rule as to whether or not it's appropriate until I hear what it is. But do we have any other business from anybody? Okay, well, we're there at the end. I've just got one or two quick points to mention. We've got before our next meeting, which is on the 26th of January, we do have some other dates to notice. I think there's a training session next week on the 28th, if my memory serves me correctly, and that is actually primarily set up for the committee because it's about bonds and investment in bonds. It's training, and that's from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, as according to my calendar, next Wednesday, the 28th. School half term for many, so it may or may not be convenient, but all members of the board, although it's aimed primarily at the committee, members of the board are invited to attend that. Chris or Victoria will correct me if I'm wrong. And then also, of course, before our next meeting in January, we have the Warwickshire Fund AGM on Monday, the 16th of November, and I have that from 9 till 1. I'm not sure if anybody needs to clarify anything further on that. So it's the 28th of October and the 16th of November, 2 dates for your diary if you can make them. I know people have lots of other commitments quite often, but just mention those at this stage.
Thank you, Chair, for raising
okay.
those. Both correct. And yes, board, thank you, Chair, for raising those. And they're both correct. And board members, as you correctly stated, are very much invited to Wednesday's training session.
Yeah, certainly. And of course, it wasn't, you know, the AGM last year was very, very good. And I'm going to not spare his blushes here, but Chris gave the introductory talk. And I over the years, I'm a conference junkie. I've been to loads of conferences. And his initial contribution to which was half an hour or so, was really an excellent exposition of the issues he was covering about the fund in general. And you know, I don't know if he's doing something again this year, but if so, I look forward to it.
Yes, he is.
He did extremely. So you set yourself a high bar last year, Chris. So you need to keep up to it. You did very well last year, I thought. I know Chris and Keith and Alan were there because we were sat on the same table. Can't remember whether Pominda was there or not. I think he was. But okay, that's that. The last thing I'll mention, and we can, if any of you want to feed in comments on this before the next meeting, and Victoria did suggest we might want to make. I think these meetings, you know, online, more than about 2 hours, you know, I think it is too long. You would need to have a break. This started at 11. I went for 11 because I had a number of bad experiences when I was driving to Warwick, being stuck on the wrong side of the M40 for about an hour or more. And another occasion when there was a major accident in Warwick when I was held up for quite a long time. So I started coming by train, and I went for an 11 o'clock start to fit in with sensible train times from South Wales, where I'm based. But if members would prefer these meetings to start a bit earlier, say 10:30 or even 10, that could be considered. Or if you're happy to stick with 11, we'll stick with that. So if anybody has any views on that, either voice them now or drop an email when you've had a chance to think about it. But otherwise, we will stick with 11. But I'm certainly open to changing to 10:30 or 10.
Chair, 10's better for me, if at all possible.
Sorry, what was that per minute?
10 o'clock's better for me.
10, okay, well, 10 o'clock's better for me. Would everybody be happy with 10 o'clock? I'm presuming at this stage that the next meeting in January will be like this one, online again. I mean, there's no indication that we're going to be moving from this for the foreseeable future. So Perminda's put in a request that my invitation for 10 o'clock start next time. Any objection to that? You have your way, Perminda, and thank you for that. That's excellent, I think. So good. Well, thank you all very much. It's been, I think, and can I finally thank the officers? I would say this, and Sean, obviously you're new, but I think we've given you some indication. The way the board is now working and the service we're getting from the officers, and to be fair, this is no reflection on the old officers who've been here a longer time, but we've got much more resource now. And I think we're in a very, very different place to where we were a year ago. There's always a spectrum in any field of activity, and we were somewhat at the wrong end of the spectrum previously, and I think we're now very much at the right end of the spectrum. I hope that Perminda, Keith and Alan would agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, if we've nothing else to say, I can declare the meeting closed. And again, thank you all, and thank Deborah for the servicing provision that she gives to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Goodbye all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you at one of the events I mentioned. Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.